Hi everybody, it's been a little bit since I posted anything here on the Inflationary Minute, and I thought I should rectify that. And really the problem for me has been there's been so much news going on, I'm having a hard time condensing it down to 60 seconds. So this is going to be a little bit longer, but here we go. Back in the end of 2024, I put together this 2x2 matrix to give an idea of how I thought the economy was going to evolve in 2025. I thought that we were headed for a soft landing with decent to strong GDP growth and modest inflation. Things were trending down. I said, sure, this is as good a guess as any. Why not? Well, we're 4 or 5 months later, and I feel like things have changed. We're seeing weaker GDP growth, or at least signals that that's happening, maybe, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, and inflation seems to be ramping up, so we might be headed for the dreaded stagflation. Now, recently, Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, he gave a speech in my backyard at the Economic Club of Chicago. I've never been invited to a speech there. If you would like to invite me, let me know. Otherwise, here is what Chairman Powell had to say. Near-term inflation expectations have moved up significantly. Well, why is that? Let's take a look at the data. On the left, this is an inflation nowcast, which I've cited a bunch of times, and you can see there's 2 points of inflection in the orange line, which is the PCE inflation forecast. There was about January when CPI came out, PCE jumped up, and PCE is the one that the Fed cares about, so that's why I care about it. And then February and March, we saw that the inflation jumped because of tariffs. Initially were proposed and sort of hit before they were put on pause. Whatever, it's a whole thing. It's been all over the news. You get it. The point here is that the PCE forecast is at 3.2%, which is getting away from the Fed's target of 2%. So we're headed in the wrong direction, which is kind of scary. This other chart that I have here, University of Michigan, consumer expected inflation, this median number has jumped up to almost 4.5%. So you can see it was on a downward trend for a while as we came out of the pandemic, and it's looking back up. Again, that's because of tariffs. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Chairman Powell. It says in the second text box here, tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. And yeah, of course that's going to happen. I mean, when your costs go up by a lot, companies are going to pass that through to price. The interesting thing to me, from a business perspective, in case you didn't know, I do pricing stuff on a day-to-day basis, is this second line where it says the outcome will depend on how long it takes for companies to pass through fully to prices. So the costs come in, how quickly can I turn that around to price? That's an interesting question that I think about on a day-to-day basis. But the interesting thing to me is when we look at a chart like this, where I'm showing various indices out there. The gray one is the Producer Price Index since January 2018 until March of 2025, which is the most current data that we have. And we can see that it went up about 29% over that period. I picked out 2 industries that I serve very frequently. In green, that's building supplies, distributors thereof, and they're up 54%. And in blue, HVAC manufacturers, they're up 55%. So these are huge increases. These are above the rate of inflation. And my interpretation here is that those industries tend to have pricing power. And what we would look for them is they're probably going to push cost to price pretty much right away. Now, the interesting thing about this particular chart, you can see I added a couple of red lines there. For building supplies distributors, we're already starting to see an acceleration in the price of those industries. They're pushing through cost to price. And if you think about it, building supplies, you need a lot of lumber, which typically comes from Canada. Of course, tariffs from Canada are going to make an impact. Contrast that with the HVAC one, which again is in blue. They haven't seen that acceleration in price. It might be the case that they're taking a wait and see approach. What are my competitors going to do? Are these tariffs going to actually stick? And things like that. It's flat for now. So industries are going to have different responses to how tariffs hit. I think that this is a really great clarion call to make sure you understand what your competitors are doing. And hopefully you've taken the past few months or maybe year or so to make sure that you can respond to price changes, because they're going to happen. Sometimes they're going to go up, sometimes they're going to go down, and you need to make sure that you can respond. Now back to Chairman Powell, he ended with a great line. As a great Chicagoan Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast. And what he was getting at here is there is a ton of uncertainty in the market. Here are two estimates of Q1 GDP growth. Both of these estimates come from the Federal Reserve. On the left, the Atlanta GDP Nowcast, or GDP Now estimate, pardon me. And they're showing in that green line there negative 2.2%. What? That's a pretty big decrease. I actually already covered this on a video not too long ago, or at least I posted something on LinkedIn about it, because a lot of people were sending me this. Compare that versus the New York Nowcast, which is showing the median there is 2.58%, so still healthy growth. It's very strange. Even the Federal Reserve has a different take on what may or may not happen. This is the clearest distillation of the uncertainty in the market that I could find. So what's the Fed going to do? Right now, one of my favorite things to cite is the Fed Watch from the CME. They are likely to continue with the current state, which is to leave interest rates where they are, 2.25% to 2.5%. We don't know what's going to happen, so we shouldn't do too much. I know that President Trump wants a cut because he wants to supercharge growth. I don't know that that's such a good idea in the face of increasing inflation, but we'll see. Now, enough with the guessing. There are some important data releases coming up. On April 30th, the GDP for Q1 is actually released. And I get it, that's an estimate. It's subject to revision for a few months. That's fine, but we'll know, did we come in closer to that negative 2% or the positive 2%? And then on the right, I put a little green box around it. It got a little small. Sorry about that. PCE gets released on April 30th. So April 30th is a pretty big day, at least in my world of economic data. And we'll find out where the rubber meets the road. Now, between now and then, I anticipate releasing a bit more content about how to respond to tariffs, because they've hit the market and then they were withdrawn. And I think just a couple of guideposts for how you should respond might be helpful. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, thank you for spending a little bit of time with me. This has been the Inflationary Minute. Take care.